nutrition. The in marasmus, the peripheral edema is absent. In Kwashiorkor, it is present. In marasmus, there is no hair changes. In Kwashiorkor, you will have a hair changes, sparse hair. Skin is dry and wrinkled in marasmus, while in case of Kwashiorkor, there will be the flaky appearance of the skin. Marasmus, there will be the voracious appetite, but in Kwashiorkor, you will have a very poor appetite. In marasmus, the subcutaneous fat pad is absent, while in Kwashiorkor, you will have a reduced subcutaneous fat. Liver, fatty liver is uncommon, while Kwashiorkor is very common. The prognosis of marasmus is better, while the Kwashiorkor is poor because of the immune system problem. Then we'll go for the certain vitamins as we have gone through it. This vitamin deficiencies they're categorized in two categories: fat soluble and water soluble. The fat soluble category vitamins are A, D, E, and K. The A is responsible for the rhodopsin synthesis. The deficiency will lead to the xerophthalmia and keratomalacia. While the vitamin D, which is known as cholecalciferol, is mostly responsible for the intestinal calcium absorption and bone remodeling. The deficiency of this vitamin leads to the rickets in children and osteomalacia in adults. Vitamin E, which is known as tocopherol, it acts as an antioxidant, and the deficiency of this enzyme leads to the hemolytic anemia, neurological damage, and reproductive organs atrophy. Vitamin K, which is basically gamma carboxylation of glutamate, which have a cofactor in protein factor chain, and the deficiency of this enzyme leads to the coagulopathy with reference to the protein factor 2, 7, 9, and 11. These are the water-soluble vitamins. Vitamin A, which is also known as thiamine, and which is the main function of which is decarboxylation and aldehyde transfer reaction, and deficiency of this enzyme leads to the beriberi. B2, which is known as riboflavin, it leads to the oxidative reduction reaction, and the deficiency of this leads to the dermatitis, glossitis, cheilosis, crackings along the angles of the mouth. B3, which is niacin, it also involves in oxidation reduction pathways, and the deficiency of this leads to the pellagra. B6, which is known as pyridoxine, which its main function is in the transamination decarboxylation, and the deficiency of this enzyme leads to neuropathy, glossitis, and anemia. B9, which is known as folate, is responsible for DNA synthesis, and the deficiency of this enzyme leads to the megaloblastic anemia. B12, which is known as cyanocobalamin, in other words, which is its chemical name, and the function is DNA synthesis and myelination. The deficiency of this enzyme leads to the peripheral neuropathy with megaloblastic anemia. Last but not the least is vitamin C, which is known as ascorbic acid. It leads to the hydroxylation, and deficiency of this enzyme vitamin leads to the scurvy. Now coming to the components of nutrition quickly, we have two components, macro and micronutrients. In macronutrients, we have three subcategories: carbohydrate, proteins, and fats, while in micronutrients, we have vitamins and minerals. Carbohydrate, the primary energy source of carbohydrates will provide around 40% of energy to the body. Each gram gives 4 kilocalories. Daily body requirement of a carbohydrate is 2 grams per kg per day to 4 grams per kg per day, which is 200 grams per day. नहीं आ रहा था, म्यूट कर दिया था आपने। सोने मुझे तो नहीं आ रही, आपको आ रही है। Lipids, which will provide around 25 to 45% of the lipids and of the nutrition requirement to the body. The fundamental units of lipids are fatty acids, and each gram of the lipids provides around 9 kilocalories. Requirement is 100 to 200 grams per week. The dietary fat are comprised of triglycerides and predominantly of 4 long-chain fatty acids, 2 saturated palmitic C16 and stearic C18, and 2 unsaturated oleic linoleic acids. In addition, small amounts of linolenic and medium-chain fatty acids also contribute to the lipids. The fundamental units of proteins are amino acids. The daily requirement is around 0.8 grams per kg per day, which increases to 1.2 grams per kg per day in a patient with acute illness to 2.5 and severe physiological stress patient ICU. Each gram of protein is around 4 kilocalories of energy. Coming up the different ways of nutrition assessment. No, for nutrition assessment, we have different categories and different ways in which you can able to assess the typical requirement of patients, that they are under over or under deficient or over efficient in terms of nutrition. So you can go in different ways. I will discuss 2 or 3 different ways. You can take it the way you feel better in order to memorize these stuff. Now, normally what we take as indicators to assess this nutrition status is a total leukocyte count of the body, serum albumin, total cholesterol, and the clinical risk factors like either the patient has nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation, difficulty chewing, swallowing, or history of any GI diseases, weight loss, especially more than 50% unintentional over the last 3 months, and the total body mass index value. Now, if this criteria, total leukocyte count, is more than 1.5, you call it normal. Borderline variety will indicate if your count is between 1.2 to 1.5, and you say underlying undernutrient when it is less than 1.2. The serum albumin levels, it is more than 35 grams per liter is a normal value. If it falls between the 20 to 34 grams per deciliter, it is borderline, and less than 28 grams is basically undernutrition or nourished. Same goes for the person BMI, more than 22 is normal and less than 22 is under. Another way of assessing the nutrition assessment is direct and indirect way. The direct way follows a simple rule of ABCD. A indicates anthropometric methods, C clinical, and D stands for dietary, and B for biochemical, right? A, anthropometric measurements, that means the weight of a patient, the height of a patient, the mid-arm circumference of a patient, and B indicates the biochemical parameters which we discussed, the TLC count and the serum albumin levels. Clinical methods wise, we can say you will calculate the BMI per patient. Dietary evaluation methods, the total requirement of a protein, carbohydrate, protein, and fat balance. Indirect methods of nutrition assessment are the ecological variables, including agriculture, crop production, how much that country is providing in a particular area, the economic factor of the area, the overall household income source of that patient, the food availability, prices, the profession of a patient, the cultural and social habits, like patients are purely vegans, vegetarian, or they consume meat also. To such a certain kind of a cultural social habits also contributes for the nutrition assessment. Otherwise, the vital health statistics like the morbidity and mortality rate of that country, the infant mortality rates, under 5 mortality rates, they all indicates this indirect methods of nutrition assessment of that particular patient living in a particular region of the world. Now, the commonest method, okay, which I would say as a student you should follow is this slide, which is very important. You go in a routine-wise, you take history, you examine the patient, you assess the labs, which is the most easily accessible one. What do you ask in history? The history, the first of complaints, why patient is nutrition depleted. Number one, you need to ask, is this patient is throwing too much? Why he's throwing up? Is this because of some obstruction in the upper GI? Like the patient having the gastric outlet obstruction. The food is not going forward, so he's throwing a lot. People or the patients having esophageal carcinoma strictures cannot able, if they have a desire to eat, but cannot able to swallow. So, like which called the dysphagia. People who are having a certain inflammatory bowel diseases like ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, tuberculosis of a small bowel, they have a lots of diarrhea. They're eating, but they're losing a lot. And then the factors like the underlying intestinal malignancy is also important there, which leads to the underlying status of nutrition status for the patients. Comorbid condition like patient is having diabetes, having chronic kidney problem, that is their hypoalbumic. Social and dietary factors, yes, you definitely ask about the social economic background, intake of a patient, how much amount is he consuming in a food, like both for breakfast, the lunch, and the dinner. occupation of patient, how much he's earning per month, how many dependents are there available in the family under that person, that are all important. Second was the physical examination, in which you assess the patient clinically. In assessment has different tools. Number one is anthropometric measurements, in which you go for the weight and height, and which is known as or individual weight, individual height, or you go for the BMI. Then you go for skin fold thickness, either the biceps thickness or the triceps thickness, by using the certain tools or instruments like vernier caliper, mid-arm circumference. Then you assess the signs of malnutrition, just like looking the paleness or pallid looks of a patient, puffiness over the face, thinning of the hairs, right? And the patient has got the swollen tongue. There's fissures at the angle of the mouth. Tongue is red and beefy, leading to muscle bulk, skin fold, dryness, dehydrations, and there will be dependent edema in the peripheries. They all are the features that we're supposed to see in the physical examination. Last but not the least is the must tool. Must tool is the one of the tool here which is present here in order to assess the patient's. We will discuss this must tool in our later slides. Now, my question to you guys is, what is BMI and how will you calculate this? We discuss BMI throughout our lecture edition, because we should know what BMI actually it is. What is BMI, students? You can write in your slide boxes. Body mass index, right? Good. Ramsha studying weight in kg plus height in centimeter squares. Good. Ramsha, let's see. Okay. I would say it's not centimeter, meter square, right? Weight in kg divided by height in meter square, not in centimeter square, right? Okay, Naveed. Is there any background noise now? Can you hear me, Naveed? I think you have put a comment on the chat box. There is a lot of background noise. Okay. Right. So let's see. Okay. So BMI is okay. Let's put the scenario. 35 years old male with 70 kg weight and 6 feet height will have how much of BMI? That means you need to calculate it. So for BMI, weight in kg divided by height in meter square, right? Is normally be taken this way, or you can take it weight in pounds or height in feet square. But I think this formula is most easy to interpret and even to calculate. Weight in kg divided by height in meter square. So if you have this value and if you have 18.5 or less than 18.5 is the normal, but if you less than 18.5, then it is underweight. 18.5 to 24.9 is the normal. Above 25 to 29.9 is overweight. 30 to 34.9 is obese, and more than 35 is extremely obese, right? Now you need to calculate the BMI of our patients. Remember, I have put the height in feet, so you need to convert this into the meter square. How will you do that? Any bright answers in the chat boxes? Thirty seconds to all students. Did you get my question, guys? A patient who is around 70 kg male, weight in kg divided by height in meter square. So I have given you a height in 6 feet. You need to convert this feet into the meter square, into the meter, and then into the meter square. Now give me the BMI of this particular patient. Misbah Kamal has said 20.9. Okay. Misbah, how did you calculate this? Can you please put your values in the chat box so everybody can see that? 20.9, 20.9. Okay, Tareem is also 20.9. Okay, Tareem. Guys, how did you calculate this thing? If you can tell me. How did you convert the feet into the meter square? Good. Okay, Miss. Right. Okay. So did you get? Now you get these guys, huh? Okay, how will you calculate the BMI? I'm sure the other students is also get it because the calculation BMI often comes in your musky stations when the nutrition component is a part, right? You should know how to calculate BMI. Okay. Now this is the MUST tool which we discussed earlier. MUST tool is basically is a score which has got 5 steps. In step 1, we have to calculate the BMI of a patient. In step 2, we need to assess the weight loss score. Weight loss score means unintentional weight loss in percentage over the last 3 to 6 months. If that percentage is less than 5, you score 0. If it's between 5 to 10%, you score 1. And if you more than 10% of weight loss, then you score 2, right? Same wise in step 1, if your BMI of a patient is more than 20, you score 0. If it's between 18.5 to 2, you score 1. And if it's less than 18.5, you score 2, which is undernutrition. So more than 10%, 2. Under 18.5 BMI is score 2. Step 3 will indicate if patient is acutely ill and there has been or likely to be no nutritional intake for more than 5 days. That means patient is NPO for more than 5 days, taking nothing but oral, right? Either he is intubated in an ICU, he is comatose or unconscious, or patient is NPO because of some major intestinal surgery, right? 3. Step 4, add scores together to calculate overall risk for malnutrition. Score is 0, that means your patient has very low risk for the malnutrition. Score 1, medium risk, and if score is 2 or more, you have a very high risk for the malnutrition, right? And your step 5 will indicate that low risk, you need to rescale annually. The medium risk patients what do you have to do? You encourage them to take food. In a high risk patient you need to find out the cause and why patient depleted and what are the ways you can able to deliver this patient to achieve your target of maintaining the nutrition, right? Asfandhya, yes, you have raised your hands. Any question, Asfandhya? You can type in the chat box if you have any questions, Asfandhya, because you have raised your hands, right? Get it, students? Now, okay. Now, what is overall goals for nutrition support in our surgical patient? Number 1 is prevent to reverse the catabolic effect or disease or injury. to meet the energy requirement of metabolic process, to maintain a normal core body temperature, and to improve substrates for adequate tissue repair. This is what we require in every surgical patients. Coming to the laboratory parameters, right? These laboratory parameters will indicate your assessment in terms of nutritional deficiencies. The typical one is the hemoglobin value. You assess the PCV of a patient and the HB values. If the values are less than 8, that means patient is anemic. Now you have to decide this anemia is microcytic anemia or macrocytic anemia. If this has for the PCV, MCV is less than 75, then this is microcytic anemia, which occurs in iron deficient anemia. If your MCV is above 80 or 90, then this is macrocytic anemia that comes in a category of a folate or vitamin B12 deficiency. You will have to see the total leukocyte counts, which we have already screened in our one of the parameters. It has to be above 2.5 to 3. Okay? There should be no leukopenia. Serum albumin level 35 grams per liter or 3.5 grams per liter is very important. Serum pre-albumin levels, serum transferrin levels below 200 milligram per deciliters, and total iron binding capacity. These are the crude way of assessing the nutritionally assessing a patient in a pre-surgical era. Now coming to the estimation of energy needs. So any idea, guys, how will you measure or estimate the energy needs of a particular patient? Anything you guys have done in your biochemistry? I hope you guys have done lots of Krebs cycles and metabolisms in which you have done certain laboratory ways or a chemical test in which you can able to assess the energy requirements of particular patients. So any methods in which you can able to assess the energy requirements of particular patient? Any ideas? Please write down in the chat box if you have any ideas. Okay, basal energy expenditure. Okay. मुझे screen आ रही है ना? Okay, so these are the total energy requirement and estimation of protein requirement. There's two ways in which you can able to calculate this estimation of energy needs. The one is total energy requirement and estimation of protein requirements, right? Okay. Okay, Ramesh. Okay, fine. So the estimation energy needs, right, in which you can able, how do you calculate this? So this is basal energy expenditure times stress factor times activity factor is equal to the total energy requirement, right? So when you sum up all these stuff, then you can get the total energy requirement of a particular patient. And this total energy requirement is nothing but the basal energy requirement followed by stress factor, followed by activity factor. Now the question is that how would you calculate basal energy expenditure? For that, we have a very well-known equation which is known as Harris-Benedict's equation, which we normally use to calculate this. Otherwise, we have another method like calorimetry, or you can roughly 25 times age of a patient can roughly calculate this basal energy requirement factors. But most reliable out of all three is the Harris-Benedict equation. Okay, this equation tells you how to calculate it. Then for men and women, it's different. You might ask in exams to calculate this value, especially in MCQs. You should know about this thing, right? Stress factors and activity factors. For stress factors, for starvation, you have values between 0.08 to 1. For the severe infection like peritonitis, is 1.25. And it goes to the major, the polytrauma, it goes factor to 1.6. In pancreatitis is 1.8, which is almost highest, and in burns is 2. So highest stress factors occurs in burns, which is more than 50% of total body surface area, and after that it is in pancreatitis, and then in major or polytrauma, right? So yeah, you should know that. So the stress of burn is more than anything else. Activity factors में, if the patient is completely sedentary lifestyle, you have activity rate of 1.2, that is patient is bedridden. If patient has a mild activity, you go for 1.3. If patient is extremely active, we call for the 1.3, right? Second component was the estimation protein requirement. Protein requirement varies according to the body need, and the normal healthy, non-stressed individual needs 0.8 grams per kg per day protein, which is around 24 into 1 of a calorie to protein ratio. In surgical patients, this can go up to 1.5 grams per kg per day. Now, clinical condition में protein requirements in grams per kg per day. Whereas in mild metabolic stress like elective surgeries, it is only 1 to 1.1, right? Which is a normal requirement. But in severe metabolic stress like major trauma, polytrauma, sepsis, pancreatitis, burns, it can requirement goes to 1.5 to 2.5 grams per kg per day. Coming to the nutrition administration and support in surgical patients. So, how can the risk of malnutrition increase in surgical patients? So, it has to in two ways. Number one, it has to self-swallow and unself-swallow. Self-swallow में oral nutrition support, unself-swallow में GI intact होना चाहिए and GI non-functional perforated. So then, if your GI is intact, you have to prefer enteral feeding. If your GI is non-functional, then you have to prefer parenteral nutrition. This is a normal dictum of your surgical nutrition, right? If your oral route is available and safe and intact, you should go for it in any way. If your oral route is not safe or not intact, then you have to go for the parenteral route. Now coming to the routes wise, so routes can be oral, enteral, and parenteral. Oral route is a preferred route, mostly physiological and least invasive. In patient with functioning GI tract, several requirements needed before starting oral diet: mental alertness and orientation, and intact chewing and swallowing mechanism, right? That means your patient has a GCS of 15/15. Patient should have teeth and a tongue to chew and bite that food particles, and you have a good muscle to masticate it, and then a swallow mechanism to transport it to the stomach where digestion happens. If you don't have these things, then the oral route is not the safest route for the patient. Remember that. Now, what are the conditions we can have achieved? You cannot achieve this oral route safely is that if your patient is unconscious, then you cannot go for this. If your patient doesn't have a teeth, especially elderly patients, or have undergone glossectomy of sear tongue, he cannot achieve this target. Right? A patient has certain motility disorders of upper GI, then they cannot able to swallow. So some commercially available SIF feeds are used in patients whose appetite are impaired or in whom the adequate intake cannot be maintained, with the typical requirements around 1 kilocalorie per. Coming to the enteral nutrition, the enteral nutrition has divided into the following subheads, I would say, and these heads are the basics of enteral nutrition, right? The indications and contraindications, the different routes of enteral nutrition, and the feeding regimen and its complications. Okay. So the number one of enteral nutrition is it's the most preferred route over the part enteral because it's simple, relatively inexpensive, and it maintains the GIT cytoarchitecture, mucosal integrity, absorptive function, and normal microbial flora of a GI tract, which is required for digestion. Certain indications of the enteral route: oral intake is less than 50% of required need for the previous 7 to 10 days. Dysphagia or chewing problem due to stroke, brain, head injuries, major burns, and low output. Contraindication में mechanical obstruction to the GI tract, prolonged ileus, severe GI hemorrhage, diarrhea, intractable vomiting, high GIT output, and severe enterocolitis. What are the different options available for the enteral feeding access, right? So as an oral, because you're using the oral cavity, your mouth is natural. But for the enteral, you're using the enteral route, but in different way. What? Either you're using the nasogastric tube, which is known as NG tube, Either you're using the nasoduodenal tube or nasojejunal tube, which is known as NJ tube, or you might use the percutaneous endoscopic gastrostomy, either the surgical gastrostomy, or you can use the percutaneous jejunal tube, right, or surgical jejunostomy, right? Any questions regarding this? Now, NG is a common thing, item which comes in your exams, right? It normally comes in your OSCE, almost 85%, 90%. So this is the enteral form of a nutrition in which you provide NG to a person which is not mentally alert, we're not able to swallow, it doesn't have a safe oral route. You provide this tube into that patient, right, to provide aspiration. Now, the people who have a contraindication for the NG tube will have an NG tube. What are these patients? Mostly these patients are the patients which required diet, which need to bypass the first part of the GI, right? And comes the percutaneous endoscopic gastrostomies. This is the most skillful endoscopic technique which is used nowadays, in which you use endoscope and put and puncture the stomach directly under the scope guided. Mostly it is used in the patients who have stroke and have low GCS. You perform surgical gastrostomy mostly in ENT patients who are undergoing head and neck surgery for cancers, right? You will perform endoscopic and open surgical jejunostomies in a patients who has upper GI cancers. And this purpose is used for the palliative nutrition purpose, right? This jejunostomy options. Now, what is the major difference between the two different types of enteral nutrition, which is a gastric feeding and a jejunal feeding? This is the two common types of enteral nutrition which we normally encounter. Now, in these two categories, in one, the nutrition goes directly into the stomach, in another, the nutrition goes directly into the jejunum. Now, for the stomach, the solution we're supposed to use has to be hypertonic or isotonic. For the jejunum, it always has to be isotonic because it can't tolerate hypertonic. If you have a hypertonic solution for the jejunal feed, the patient might not tolerate it. And for gastric feeding, you might give in the bolus or continuous. For the jejunal, you can only give in a continuous form. No bolus feed can be given in jejunal feed. Okay. Now, what are the side effects for these? For gastric feeding, patient may have intolerance, so they can develop vomiting. While for the jejunal feeding, patient normally doesn't have vomiting, but patient can develop diarrhea. Now, these are the certain complications for enteral feeding. Number one is gastrointestinal complications, which are the nausea, vomiting, bloating, abdominal distension, and diarrhea. Now, these complications can be calculated or depends upon the formula selection and the feeding techniques, and the quantity you're giving to the patients and the time in which you're infusing it. Second complication is technical, in which your tubes which you have infused in enterally, they might block. Okay, they might dislodged, right? So this is very important. Metabolic complications may fluid electrolyte imbalances. Infective may you might have gastroenteritis septicemia, and psychological may patient might don't feel that much oral aversion, altered body self-image, because there's something is always there in the body which they need to take care of it. But what are the advantages of enteral nutrition? It provides advantage of trophic feeding, that means maintaining the continuity and cytoarchitecture of a GI cells, and the mucosa by providing glutamine, providing the blood supply, promoting peristalsis, maintain integrity of interstitial mucosa, prevents bacterial translocation. It's very economical, easy to administer, and probably safer than the other ones after oral route. Coming to the parenteral nutrition, as the name indicates, parenteral means away from the enteral route. So, delivery of all nutrition requirements by IV route without the use of a GIT tract, or you can bypass GIT route, is known as parenteral nutrition. Mostly, the infused formula is a sterile liquid chemical formula, and it can be delivered through the central line or the peripheral line. Certain common indications for the parenteral nutrition: when a patient has a failed enteral nutrition with appropriate tube placement, severe acute pancreatitis, short bowel or short gut syndrome, mesenteric ischemia, paralytic ileus, that means the GI integrity is not intact, right? Small bowel obstruction, GI fistula, especially the higher output fistula. These are the major indications for parenteral nutrition. Normally, the formulations we use for the parenteral formulas 2-in-1 or 3-in-1, right? 2-in-1 means either you're going for the carbohydrate to proteins, or you can use all three formulas: carbohydrate, proteins, and fats, in a one single liquid sterile formula, right? In addition to these three basic formulas, you can also add up certain things like water, electrolytes, and vitamins and minerals. Now, these parental nutrition has two different categories. One is partial parental nutrition, and is a total parental nutrition. The total parental nutrition supplies all the daily nutrition requirements. Partial, only part of the daily nutrition requirements supply, supplementing the oral intake 50 to 70% of patients' energy needs. Right? TPN is delivered through central line, while the partial parental nutrition delivered through the peripheral line. Total parental nutrition is a long-term support for more than 10 days, while partial parental nutrition is for the short-term support for only 10 to 14 days. While total parental nutrition, the formula which which we are using normally, has a high osmolarity and they are hypotonic. While for the partial parental nutrition, the formulation should have a low osmolarity. But this TPN has also got certain complication. The number one is technical. Technical is because we are infusing the line, central and peripheral. So definitely there are the line related problems, which are the sepsis of a catheter, right? And sometimes because of the hypertonic salines, you might have developed phlebitis at the venous side where you injected, and leading to the burns. You may have technical failures like while putting the central lines, you may ended up complication like pneumohydral pneumothorax, because you're going up to the heart, the central line of atria. You may go arrhythmias can form in that, or you can have air embolism introduced while going for the TPN diet. Metabolic complications are hyperglycemia, electrolyte abnormalities, overfeeding, polystasis in gallstones, as gallbladder is not working at all. Patient is basically in a pseudo fasting status, and the raised liver enzymes, because your intestine is not using at all. That way, you may lead to the intestinal atrophy. Overall, studies have shown there are no significant differences in the mortality rate, but there's no significant difference regarding the length of hospital stay between enteral and parenteral. But there are certain features which we have encountered and we've seen normally, is that enteral feeding has got a low risk of infection, while parenteral has got a high risk of infections. Parenteral are very expensive and costly formulas. Enteral are decreased cost. Enteral feeding, lower incidence of hypoglycemia. Parenteral में higher incidence of hypoglycemia because of hyperosmolality. Now, coming up to the certain case scenarios, as we have discussed our anterior parenteral nutrition surgical patients. Now I'll put you certain questions in front of you. So let's discuss how much we can incorporate clinically these basics of nutrition in our surgical patient. The case scenario 1 tells you that 25 years old female having 27 kg of weight and height of 160 centimeter had a history of corrosive ingestion as a failed suicidal attempt around 2 years back. Now she presented to the OPD with the complaints of difficulty in swallowing to solids and recently with liquids. She has almost lost more than 50 kg of weight in the last 6 months, which is unintentional. What is your diagnosis? Calculate her BMI, calculate the MUS score, ideal route of feeding in her case, and daily caloric requirement in her case. 30 seconds to all of the students. Write down your answers on your chat boxes and we'll discuss it. Yes, seals. Okay, Amber has answered. Okay, Amber, we have got 5 questions. We need to answer all 5 questions, right? So, what is your diagnosis? The answer by Amber Ali is it esophageal stricture? Okay, this is a question A, part of a one. Now, calculate her BMI. It's 10. Okay, how come 10? Okay, Merck score. Okay. So, answers are esophageal structure is fine. Yes, agree. Bilal में BMI was 10.54 is fine. 10 roughly 10 or 10.54 is a BMI. That's fine. And her Merck score is undernourished is malnutrition because score is more than 2, right? Added root feeding in her case would be enteral route is a preferred route, right? And daily requirement in her case, caloric requirement in her case, enteral route is a okay, fine. And what next? Daily caloric requirement in her case, calculate the calories. Yes, Hira, must score we have calculated this 5-step scores in which in the first step you calculate the BMI, second में the percentage of weight losses, and then you have to make sure how much the score it is. If the score is more than 2, then it is high risk. This patient has more than 2. Yes, how to calculate it, Misbah? Tell me. Remember, we have a roughly nitrogen requirements of a typical patient set, and a patient who has more than weight loss, what can you typically calculate this nutrition requirement? Okay. So the corrosive stricture, yes, and the preferred 2 is the 10 is the answer for the BMI. Entry route is a preferred route, and but which is the percutaneous endoscopic hysteroscopy or feeding jejunostomy. Okay, 2 routes. But in some cases, for the short term, you might can use for the total parenteral nutrition, which is not the same and very expensive one. The enteral is the best. Now, how do you calculate? By using the Benedict's equation, right? There's energy requirement, stress factor, activity factor, okay, and which is roughly 30 to 35 kilocalories per kg per day for Hercules, right? Question 2, 80 years old male, known case of hypertension, ischemic heart disease, and diabetes mellitus developed sudden onset of right-sided hemiparesis 2 weeks back that need hospitalization. Now he's bedridden at home with difficulty in speech and swallowing. What kind of dysphagia this gentleman is having, and how would you deliver the nutrition in him as a best way? Ramsha, okay, Ramsha, I will elaborate you. Ramsha, we will discuss must score at the end once we complete all the scenarios, okay? Right? Right to? So the answer is oropharyngeal dysphagia is correct, and anterior root is good. But I think I would like to say that you should specify the type of anterior root is very important. So anterior and parenteral is a very broad terminology. You need to use different ways in which you can use anterior root. So in this gentleman, we're supposed to use a percutaneous endoscopic gastrostomy as the safest and the best way to deliver nutrition, as its swallowing mechanism is disturbed and is unsafe oral route. So we are using the anterior route, but this time the anterior route is through the endoscopic way, which is a pack, right? We can also offer him open gastrostomy if endoscopic facilities are not available at your locality or in your hospital services, right? Question 3. 45 years old male developed severe abdominal pain after having binge drinking on a New Year Eve. Pain started at the epigastrium and radiated to the back with intractable vomiting. He was taken to the emergency department. His workup shows a mileage of 1,000 international units, lipase of 3,500 international units. The CT scan shows edematous pancreas with non-enhancing body and tail with modified CT-SI score of 10 by 10. What is your diagnosis? How will you calculate his caloric requirement? What is the ideal route of nutrition in this patient? Okay. Anterior root dysphagia indica. Okay. Someone has said answer is patient has got acute pancreatitis. Okay. With the 3 questions, guys, you need to answer all 3 questions because all of you guys will normally get stuck on the caloric requirement. Caloric requirement means we have discussed the equations, yeah, the 3 different equations. You can apply that equation in this patient also, right? So, answer acute pancreatitis. Okay, it's not simple acute pancreatitis. It's not simply acute pancreatitis. There's extra information has given on your case scenarios. Any pick? Good pick, please. This is pancreatitis, agree, but there's something else along with this. Yes, good. लेकिन मैं लेक्चर में बाद में कल कीजिए ठीक है ओके Okay, good. Amber, good. It is necrotizing pancreatitis. This is what I wanted to hear from all you guys because this shows a non-enhancement on CT scan, which is necrotizing. It is pancreatitis, we know, but which category of pancreatitis? This is necrotizing pancreatitis. How will you calculate its caloric requirement and what is the ideal route for nutrition in this patient? Remember, we have discussed the different routes of anterior and parenteral. In anterior, there are different ways. We have used nasogastric, nasojejunal, we have used PAG. So, which route is the best route in this patient? Okay, let's discuss this patient. This patient has got what? Necrotizing severe acute pancreatitis with necrosis, and you can use calculate the calories by using Benedict's equation and enter route with feeding jejunostomy or NJ. I would say not feeding jejunostomy, but the nasojejunal tube is the best route for anterior nutrition in this patient. Okay. NJ is a special type of anterior nutrition provided to the pancreatitis patient. Whenever you heard the NJ, that means indirectly this patient has got pancreatitis around 99.9%. Okay, I think the feeding jejunostomy I've written by mistake. It is basically nasojejunal route. So agree, students? Okay, coming to question 4. 35 years old male having weight of 45 kg and height of 5 feet with history of beaten nut chewing developed difficulty in mouth opening with fungating growth over the right cheek. The punch biopsy turned out to be squamous cell carcinoma with cervical lymph nodes palpable at different levels. He is planned for wide local excision with reconstructive flap surgery and neck dissection. Calculate his BMI, what will be his mode of nutrition postoperatively, and subtype the above mode of nutrition. Yes, yes, Hira, you need to remember the common stress and activity factor. 1920. Okay. Okay. What next? Enteral. In this patient, you have to go to enteral. But remember, Amsha, I'm asking again. Categorize the subtype of the mode of nutrition. Which enteral part? So, okay, that. Yes, that is possible. You can use 25 plus age formula, but remember, this will be slight estimation. Vanadix is very much specific. Right? That's the only difference. We encourage you to remember Benedict's equation, I would say. Answers to this question, the questions में क्या आया है? It is almost 20 in this patient. 19.5 for 20 is fine. Enteral nutrition is due and use the feeding gastrostomy, percutaneous versus open. Now, why I'm saying open in this case, you can use both. You can even do the open gastrostomy by a surgeon, or you can do the pack by your gastroenterologist, right? Question 5. 60 years of female with a known case of atrial fibrillation developed sudden abdominal pain for the last 2 hours. Pain is diffuse and severe with out of proportion. Ultrasound abdomen shows no cholelithiasis. X-ray shows an hematoma, while the X-ray abdomen shows prominent small bowel loops. CT scan abdomen shows non-enhancing thickened bowel loops of upper small bowel with thrombus in the superior mesenteric artery. She underwent respiratory laparotomy with resection of major portion of the small bowel, leading to the short gut syndrome. What is the diagnosis of the patient? And how will this patient supply your nutrition post-operatively after major surgery? Okay, I'm sure fine, good. This patient has got ischemic enteritis and mesenteric ischemia is a good. If this has got acute mesenteric ischemia, you should write the proper terminology because we can also have a chronic mesenteric ischemia variety, which is not that emergency. Right? This condition known as acute mesenteric ischemia. And the type of nutrition you're supposed to provide will be the TPI. Right? Good. Acute mesenteric ischemia and the type of nutrition is total primary nutrition. Good, guys. Thank you. Any questions? Any question, guys? Must go, yes. Your answer, I okay, must go, yes. This is a must. Remember, can you see the slide, Rimsha? Merck score is a score which is calculated by 5 steps. The step 1 includes you have to calculate the BMI. If BMI is more than 20, the score is 0. If BMI falls between 18.5 to 20, sorry, it's 1. And if it's less than 18.5, the score of a patient is 2. Step 2 of a Merck score includes you have to calculate the unexplained weight loss in percentage. If the weight loss is less than 5%, 0. Between 5 to 10%, 1. More than 10%, 2. Right? Step 3, if the patient is NPO for more than 5 days, you calculate all these scores. If your score is 0, it's low risk for the nutrition deficiencies. Score 1, medium risk, and score more than 2 is a high risk. So in your patient, what is the calculation of a score? I think it is more than 2, that the patient falls into the high risk category of the nutrition deficiencies. Right? Agree? Did you get it? Okay. Got it, little slides? Wait, let me show. Can you see now? Okay. Questions. Merck square has given, Isa has given on the screen. Score 1, 2, and 3. How do you calculate the Merck score? Can you explain albumin, free albumin assessment nutrition status? Yes. Bilal, albumin, free albumin, they are just biochemical values available. Albumin is available in every hospital almost. Free albumin is the value which is not available in every lab, does not perform it. But if you perform it, it can also tell you the nutritional assessment of a patient. But most of them gives the same value add. Not a single factor is required to assess the undernutrition. You need to sum up all factors to categorize a patient and label it as an undernutrited patient. Must score how to calculate the calorie requirement, in which you have to either you use a formula of 25 kilocalories per kg per weight, or you can use the Benedict's equation. Right? If you are calculating the patients with reference to the patient's requirement, then you have to use the patient's weight. Right? Control esophageal perforation. I don't know who is Mohammed. Mohammed asked what is mean by creation control fistula esophageal perforation. We normally, it is not a commonly performed surgery of creating the control fistula esophageal perforation. Normally, we can. This category is happened in cases of a patient of trauma. If the patient has a blast victim and develop multiple perforations in the body and has esophageal perforations, or simply you have a Bohr-Heart syndrome. So what you do in that, in small perforation, if this perforation is in the cervical esophagus, then you can create a small controlled fistula in the neck. But if this perforation is within the chest, then you can't create this controlled fistula, because patient will end up into the mediastinitis. You understand? Controlled fistula concept of esophageal perforation. Esophagus has two components. One is in the neck and another is in the chest. If your perforation is in the neck level, then you can typically drain it outside by putting up the stoma bed here. Right? But if this perforation is within the chest, then you cannot create this controlled fistula, because your secretion will spill into the chest cavity of mediastinum, leading to the mediastinus, which is a highly deadly disease. And you can lose your patient within 24 hours with this. Fatima, I'm not showing up any slides. That's why you cannot see it. I'm just answering your questions right now. Okay, Fatima? There is no slides. We have done our lecture. You were there in the lecture? Fatima, we are not discussing. We are just discussing the question and answers, right? And okay, Hafsa, for that you need to go to the Benedict's equation formula. Okay, Isa is 5. Okay. Can you see the case 5 now, Isa? If yes, please let me know. Any other questions? If you're done, Isa, I need to show up the Benedict's equation for the students. How can we calculate it? This is a slide for Benedict's equation. Can you see? Follow the slide. Benedict's Harris-Benedict equation for men and women. For a man, it is 60.4 plus 30.7 plus weight in kg, then 5 times height in centimeter, then 6.8 times age in years. There is nothing like an esophagostomy. The procedure is gastrostomy and jejunostomy, right? So if your question is regarding the surgical is different, if it's a question regarding nutrition, then it's different. We perform gastrostomy to deliver nutrition. We don't perform gastrostomy, esophagostomy to deliver nutrition, right? Esophagostomy is the procedure done in a trauma surgery when you have a perforation in the cervical esophagus. You perform gastrostomy to provide nutrition in a patient who has got C esophagus or a patient who has got the cancer of head and neck surgery. Right? What is primary repair? Now, esophageal perforation repair has to be dealt in your esophageal perforation topic. Today's topic is nutrition. So let's start on that. Otherwise, it will create a lot of confusion. Primary repair in esophageal perforation, but there is completely a different ball game. I think we should have to start on a nutrition component and aspect of this time, right, Mohammed? Let's start on a nutrition. Otherwise, we'll have a prolonged discussion on a topic which is not related to it. Your topic is on nutrition, but let's take on a nutrition. For this purpose of asking esophageal perforation, you can ask me on my email. We can discuss that, right? About your queries regarding the esophageal perforation, which is completely different ball. Any other questions, or we should stop now? Guys, have you done? More questions can we take? I think we're done with the lecture. Rivsha, I've already answered your question. Post-surgical patients with low BMI, do we have to use the actual weight or ideal body weight? Now, it depends on where you have to you're achieving your nutrition with respect to the patient's requirement. So for that, you have to use the ideal body weight to determine that value. Are you using the equation to achieving the target nutrition, or you are just or you are achieving, or you're simply calculating the total calorie requirements? There are different two ways. If you are wanted to achieve the target nutrition values, then you have to use the ideal body weight, right? And if you're just calculating the calories of a particular patient, then you have to use the actual patient weight. But if you're using the energy requirements of a patient post-operatively, including all stress factors and activity factors, then you have to use the ideal body weight. This is required for this particular age and height of a particular patient. Right, Rimsha? ओके तारिक, आई थिंक डन। आप पूछ लीजिएगा स्टूडेंट्स कुछ और है बताने हमारे पास। बंद कर देते, लेकिन मेरा सिक्चर सारे 10:30 का लेक्चर, 9:30 10:30। साढ़े 9 का लेक्चर है, 9:30। 9:30 10:30। एक घंटे में लेक्चर होता है, 9 से 10 ये रहा 9 से 10 12 का एक घंटे सब एक घंटे का 9 से 10 जी, लेक्चर तो हो गया है, ये लेक्चर 2 घंटे का है, 1 घंटे